All right, returning to Clotaire II. Now his mother has passed away, and yet he is still king of... He is the sole king, really. So, when we're going through the time frame, we are looking at 599 AD. It was not long, however, before the flames of war began to rage with additional fury throughout the Empire of France. It is not known whether a desire to recover Paris induced Theodebert and Thierry to arm, or whether Clotaire, elated with success, endeavoured to extend his conquest. But it is certain that this last monarch had entered upon territories of Burgundy before a junction that had been formed between the armies of the two brothers. An action took place at a village called by Fredegarius Dormelos super Eronam, now Dormé upon Kufne. Oh no, Kuzni. Dormé upon Kuzni, near Saint, which terminated in favour of Theodebert and Thierry. Clotaire, obliged to retreat, fled first to Melun, afterwards to Paris, and then to Auray-Luna, now the British forest, till the places he had reduced after the battle of Les Lucossards were retaken and sacked, and he was at length compelled to sue for peace, which was granted him, but on very, well, we'll say on it was granted him, but on very hard terms. He was obliged to cede to the King of Burgundy all the towns in his possession, which lay between the Loire, the Seine, the sea, and the frontiers of Brittany, and to the Austrasian monarch he gave up the duchy of Don Telenus, which comprised according to the most probable opinion, that extent of country which is situated between the Aisne, that can call it also, the Oise, the Seine, and the ocean, which nearly forms the present Isle of France. The Isle of France, okay, so it looks like Clotaire is now losing all of his property. He only preserved for himself 12 districts between the sea and the Oise and the Seine, by which means he considered as a prince who had been stripped of his dominions and was reduced to a simple appanage for subsistence. This concluded the 6th century in France. The beginning of the 7th was finalized by the defeat of Gasson. In 601 AD, that people equally distinguished for their wit and courage had not yet established themselves in the province which now bears their name. They then resided in Navarre, in a part of Old Castile and of Aragon. Pampeluna and Calahorra were their principal cities. It was beyond the Pyrenees, therefore, that Theodebert and Thierry extended their incursions. Victory followed their steps. The Gascons were defeated and a tribute exacted from them. While the kings of Burgundy in Austrasia were thus employed, Clotaire, who was ever intent on revenge, made a sudden irruption into the country between the Seine and the Loire. His son Merovius, a child of 6 years, commanded his army under the conduct of Landry. That general, after reducing several towns, invested Orléans, where Berthuald, mayor of the Palace of Burgundy, had taken refuge. Théry, informed of his situation, flew to his assistance. Landry, not being able to keep the field, retreated towards Estampes, with a resolution to make a stand. Here he is, to make a stand at the passage of the river of that name. The van of Théry's army had no sooner passed the stream than he attacked it with determined bravery, and Berthuald, who commanded it, was slain, after performing prodigies of valour. But the resistance made by this gallant officer made the remainder of the troops an opportunity of passing the river and forming on the opposite side. The contest then became too unequal to be long supported. A dreadful carnage of the Neustrians ensued. The greatest part of their army perished in the field, and the few that escaped were indebted for their safety to the precipitation with which they fled. Young Merovius was taken prisoner, but what became of him afterwards is not known, since his name is never again mentioned in history. It has been suspected that he was put to death in prison, but that it is a mere conjecture. Théodebert, in the meantime, had entered the kingdom of Soissons, advanced towards Compiègne, where Clotaire had fixed his camp. The two main armies had just formed a junction, where they received intelligence of Landry's defeat, and the Neustrian prince, being now compelled to sue for peace, obtained it on reasonable terms. The king of Austrasia began to entertain apprehensions that his brother, enterprising spirit, might prove prejudicial to his interest, and therefore wished to secure a friend who might protect him from dangers. That existed, but in his own imagination. This spirit of mistrust, when made known to Théry, appears to have inspired him with similar sentiments. Hence, the amity which had hitherto subsisted between the brothers, being poisoned by dissidents, was speedily converted into discord. All right, okay, so Protade had been recently appointed to succeed Berthuald in the office of mayor of the Palace of Burgundy. This nobleman was the most supple courtier, a man of the greatest address, and the bravest and most accomplished cavalier of the age. All that reason could dictate or interest suggest did he exert in order to irritate his master against Theodebert. The Peace of Compiègne, concluded without the consent and contrary to the interest of Théry, afforded a subject of complaint which he did not fail to profit by. He contrived to acquire such an ascendancy over the mind of the prince that war was declared against the king of Austrasia. There are some, however, who pretend that this rupture proceeded from another cause, and that Brunehout was the instrument of discord that set her grandchildren at variance. That vindictive woman, say these writers, had not forgotten the insult she had sustained from Theodobert, who expelled her from his court. She was induced to revenge it by mediating the destruction of its author. She gave Théorie to understand that this prince, who had hitherto passed for the son of Childebert, was in fact but the son of a gardener. Such, according to Fredegarius and his copyist Aimont, was the true cause of the war between the two brothers. All right, something to do with the discrepancy of the sons, son being of royalty. But the truth of this account is justly suspected. The very year in which it is pretended that Brunehout was expelled from the kingdom of Austrasia, she engaged the two princes to form a jurisdiction of their armies for the purpose of opposing Clotaire, a measure which certainly implies neither hatred nor misunderstanding. If that princess had really sustained such an insult, Gregory, under whose pontificate this event would not have failed to write to her on the subject, either to console her or to make her consider her disgrace as a just chastisement inflicted on the hand of Providence. Such an opportunity for the exertion of his religious zeal to escape, since it is well known that he had always conceived it to be his duty to convey instruction to crowned heads. The King of Austrasia would doubtless have experienced the severity of his remonstrances on a proceeding so cruel and unjust. But on the contrary, we find from all the letters which he wrote at this period that a strict amity subsisted between Theodobert and Brunehout, and that the two courts were alike governed by the advice of that princess. We might add, with Pasquier, that it is highly credible they never resided with Theodobert, but that immediately after the death she never resided with Theodobert, but immediately after the death of Childebert, she followed Théorie into Burgundy. It was a kingdom newly acquired, and, well, here we go, and of course, but indifferently secured. It was out of the power of a child of 9 years to secure it, and the presence of Brunehout therefore became a matter of necessity. What at first appears but probable is rendered certain when we consider the great number of superb edifices which she caused to be erected in the dominions of the young Burgundian prince. It is not known, says the learned critic we have quoted above, that this queen, who is allowed by all to have possessed the appearance of devotion at least, ever founded a single church in Austrasia, whereas 1,000 monuments raised for pious purposes or for public convenience are still to be found in the kingdom of Burgundy. the great roads and causeways which still bear her name, the monastery of Aulnay, near Lyon, the abbey of Saint Vincent at Lyon, and of Saint Martin at Autun, the celebrated hospital at the same place, and with many other public works which must have required several years to accomplish, began and completed during the pontificate of Gregory, all seem to demonstrate that long before her pretended exile she had fixed her residence at the court of Paris. So she had a lot to do with the buildings. This supposition with regard to Theodebert is equally destitute of probability. Revenge deferred for 7 years by an enraged woman, by a queen capable of enormity, by a monster of wickedness and cruelty. For such do these authors represent Brunehaut. This is a tale, says Pasquier, that may be calculated to impose on monks who have taken a vow of patience, but not on people who frequent courts, much less on kings, at a time when they think themselves grievously insulted. Another problem, not less difficult of solution, is the facility in which the King of Burgundy suffered himself to be persuaded that Theodebert was not the son of Chilperic, a persuasion on which, they tell us, he was so strongly impressed that he took up arms in order to dethrone him. Yet war was no sooner declared than the prince, who was so strongly convinced of the illegitimacy of the usurper, became suddenly reconciled to this pretended son of a gardener. Nay, he not only concluded a peace with him, but observed it most religiously, under the immediate inspection, and by the direct advice of her who is supported to have revealed to him the horrid secret. These are contradictions so highly repugnant to reason and common sense that we scarcely deserve to be seriously, confuted. Confuted. Seriously confused. I don't know. Well, yes, this was all about him being the gardener, this one. All right. As soon as war was resolved on, the two princes took the field. But when the armies came in fight of each other, the Burgundian troops rose up against Protades, whom they justly considered as the author of those definitions which prevailed in the royal family. The principal leaders of the sedition were Unclenius and Wulf, both patricians, and both envious of the favourite. And yes, it is Wulf, W-U-L-F. The plot was carried on with so much secrecy that before anything had transpired, the whole army had invested the royal tent, where the minister was playing with the king's physician at tables. That is to say, at draughts, or probably at chess. At chess. Probably at chess. Which game might have been invented in the East Indies at the commencement of the 5th century, might very possibly have been known in France at the beginning of the 7th, since the French had long maintained a commercial intercourse with Constantinople, between whose inhabitants and the Indians an intimate connection subsisted. The air suddenly resounded with the tumultuous cries of the soldiers and their officers, who jointly demanded that the firebrand which had lighted the torch of war should be delivered up to them. The king, surprised at this insolence, was going forth to repress it, but his guard, either from zeal or from person, and from his connection with the rebels, opposed his passage, under the pretence that he could not suffer him to expose his life to the fury of an armed multitude. He then ordered Unsilanus to carry his orders to the troops, and to make every man repair to his post. But that general, instead of obeying him, told the soldiers that the king gave up the mayor of the palace to their disposal. These words were no sooner pronounced than the royal tent was forced, and Protades dragged forth and torn in pieces. This event superinduced the conclusion of a peace, and the two armies departed without fighting. Policy required that a conspiracy of so heinous a nature should not pass unpunished. Unsilanus, who had misrepresented the orders of his sovereign, was accordingly mutilated by the amputation of a foot, a species of punishment then much in use. All right, keep track of your feet there. Wolf, who had instigated the army to mutiny, was sentenced to death. The office possessed by Protades was given to a Gallic nobleman named Claude, and a man of great sense and courage. Okay, so they really got rid of that royal tent situation. Who was in charge? And yes, we now are finding chess. The game of chess is mentioned, that they had it to play with right there in their tent with help from Constantinople, and that would be the importation from India. Some time before this rupture between the two brothers, Pope Gregory had died. He was the first of the sovereign pontiffs who had any particular connection with the French kings. One of his letters to Childebert II contains a glorious eulogy. It's a eulogy on the nation. "Your kingdom," says Gregory, "is as much above other nations as sovereigns are above other men." But this familiarity, as Pasquier remarks, as thought but of short duration, he nearly proved fatal to the ancient liberties of the Galatian Church. The danger he alludes to arose from the ambition of certain ecclesiastics. It was a custom that had been introduced some years before the court of Rome to send the pallium or pall to such prelates as the pontiffs wished to distinguish. This pallium was a kind of imperial mantle with which the Christian emperor had decorated the bishops as a mark of a spiritual authority they possessed over the church. The patriarchs of the East received it at the altar during the ceremony of their consecration and sent it to the metropolitans. All of the metropolitans, who gave it to the bishops of their provinces. It was not known in the West till the commencement of the 6th century. Zayvra and first prelate of the French Church that wore it it was not till about the year 800 that it was sent to all metropolitans. All right, so there's a mantle, an imperial mantle. The bishops of Burgundy and Provence were led by their vanity to boast of this honour. Vigilius of Arles was the first who solicited the pallium, with the consent and the recommendation of King Childebert. The Pope, who acquired more than he gave, granted more than they asked. "We appoint you," says Gregory to Vigilius, "to represent us in the whole extent of the kingdom of our son Childebert. Should any prelate be obliged to travel or to absent himself from his diocese for any length of time, he must have your previous permission. If any matter of consequence should occur, or any question of faith arise, you will assemble 12 bishops to decide it. But should it be attended with any peculiar difficulty, you'll refer it to us. We send you the pallium, but you'll only wear it in the church. This is a visible encroachment on the power of the metropolitans, to whom it assigned a head or chief, a thing till then unexampled. It went still farther. It sapped the foundation of, destroyed and annihilated the most valuable liberties of the Galatian Church, which had hitherto decided all questions and all differences that had arisen within its jurisdiction by its own councils, finally and without appeal. But happily this assumption of power proved a vain prerogative that was never exerted. All right, okay, so we do not find that the Vigilius or Bishop Segrius, who had also obtained the pallium, enjoyed any kind of precedency of the synods that were holden in those days, or that they exerted a right which the sovereign pontiff could more easily grant them secure. That could more easily grant than secure. I'm sorry. I'm afraid I'm going to touch my buttons here and stop the record. All right. Okay, so it was not ambition alone that infringed on the ancient prerogatives of the Church. Heresy sometimes encroached on them, and guilt often. One Maximus, a Gallic bishop, is mentioned in history, who retired to the court of Boniface I in order to obtain protection from the sentence of a council before which he had been convicted of, Manicheism. I'm not sure what it is. But that, here we are. But that wife, but that wife pontiff, respecting the rights and privilege of this church, refused to take cognizance of the affair. He only wrote to the Gallic bishops to beg that they would grant the fugitive prelate a short delay. This was all he obtained. It does not appear that Saint Brice, when accused of adultery, found greater protection at Rome, where he resided 7 years. On the death of the prelate who had been appointed to his see, he returned and was established to his episcopal dignity. in the same manner as he had been deposed. That is to say, without any investigation of the charge preferred against him. Selonius and Sagittarius, two brothers, bishops of Embryon and Garp, the shame and disgrace of the prelacy, having been disposed by a council, restored them, by a council holden at Lyon. They obtained permission from Gontran to appeal to the Pope, who restored them to their respective sees. So yes, they're using the Pope here quite a bit. And the Pope is in Italy. That as an act of obedience to their sovereign. If they showed their respect for the king in sparing two criminals, whom he had taken under his protection, they gave proofs of their firmness at the same time by excommunicating Victor, who had been so mean as to withdraw his accusation. All right. This example, though evidently repugnant to the rights of the Church, might have had dangerous consequences in future. This does not, however, appear to be their case. Ursinius, having been disposed by the Second Council of Maison and recourse to Gregory after the death of Gontran, but that pontiff, though highly jealous of the authority of the Romish Church, did not dare to take cognizance of that cause. He confined himself simply to intercession. Simony was extremely prevalent in France at this period. The only arms that the Pope employed against a monster, and it really does say a monster, but he has been so often attacked, though never exterminated, were prayers, supplications, and complaints preferred with the greatest humility. But he assumed a very different tone in Sicily, Dalmatia, Sardinia, and considerable part of Africa. There he was no longer the servant of servants, but an absolute sovereign, who, from the plenitude of his power, could unite or divide bishoprics, could appoint, depose, or re-establish titularies, could command one to come to Rome to perform penance for his heirs, a second to submit his pretensions to the arbitration of the Holy See, and a third he could punish with the utmost severity of the canons, if he took money for ordinations. Yeah, oh my gosh, severity of the canons, that sounds like another way out that they would do away with the men. Okay, but such was the opinion that then prevailed. We have to look at both of these, simony and Manicheism. I will look them both up and write them on in the description. France and the French bishops, although devoted to the Holy See as to the centre of unity, were nevertheless independent of the jurisdiction of Rome, as well in matters of discipline as in all ecclesiastical causes whatever. All right, I'm going to take a break right now. But yes, I'm going to look at those two because it seems like they are having, at one point they're making a servant in one area and yet he's getting a great respect in others, where he can say, well, I made a mistake and so I'm going to send somebody on behalf of me to be punished.